It was Simon, of course, who back in January warned that under Rishi Sunak, the Tories were heading for a catastrophic, smashing defeat. And when he was criticised, he replied that nobody likes the man who points out the iceberg ahead. Well, I put it to him, the iceberg got them all in the end.
I look back on that article in January and I think, in broad terms, what I argued then, sadly, turned out to be true. I take absolutely no pleasure in that. I'm a victim of it myself, and I obviously am very conscious of the impact of all of this on my team and on my constituents who supported me, and on the wider Conservative cause, which I love very deeply. But we are now where we are. I think in some ways what matters less now is the personalities of what happened over the last couple of years. The underlying issues, on the other hand, matter very much. And I think we're going to have to, as a party, do some very deep thinking to respond to this.
And I really want to come on to the underlying issues in a moment, but I can't let this opportunity pass without asking you what you candidly and genuinely thought about the campaign the Conservative Party fought.
I think it was a pretty good disaster, and the causes of that were complex, right? And not all of those by any means sit with Rishi Sunak and the people in number 10 around him. Now that this is all over, I think I can say what I honestly feel, which is that he is a very good man and a very talented administrator, but he's not a natural campaigning politician.
It's not very good at the politics bit.
I think so, and I say that with genuinely no ill will. I'm at peace with what happened, and I am the first to recognise that I and others also carry responsibility for some of what happened over the last few years, and I'm not in any way putting myself on a pedestal here of sort of Aristotelian wisdom that I got everything right, because I didn't. The campaign failed to connect with the public. I think in truth we failed to make a positive offer to voters. Some of the issues that we talked about were at best marginal, and clearly we were hampered, and I saw this on the ground myself, just by the colossal imbalance in financial firepower that was deployed. So in a seat like mine, Labour were putting out national spend products at a rate of 5 or 6 to 1 what we were able to put out.
And what about the timing of the election?
I didn't argue against a summer election. I read the reasoning behind the decision to go in July very much as being connected to small boat crossings and a fundamental lack of confidence that the Rwanda plan would in fact work. And that was one of the reasons why I and others had argued earlier this year that we should do more to disapply the ECHR in connection with the Rwanda scheme, so as to make it more certain rather than less that we would get those flights off. I read it, and as I say, I have no inside knowledge, that the government wanted to go before the plan was tested, before we had a summer of crossings.
In case it didn't work.
Yes,
in case it didn't work.
That I think must have been at least part of the rationale.
And what are the things, you said things did not connect with the public, or at least marginal to what the public were thinking. What were you thinking of? I mean, a classic example was that our first policy announcement was national service, which was out of a clear blue sky, wasn't something which anyone had ever spoken to me about on the doorstep, didn't sit well with me, and I know a number of Conservatives who believe in individual freedom, and just felt like we were talking past the public rather than to them. And whilst I completely accept lots of people want civic engagement to be a theme of our national conversation, I don't think that was what I would have led into the campaign with. And, we didn't have compelling answers on the public services or on house building or on lots of the things which I think really matter. And whilst I don't think Labour in any way set out a compelling prospectus, I mean, their Ming Vase strategy continued to the very end. Given where we were at the start of the campaign, we had to make up the ground, and it was incumbent on us, I think, to do more. You mentioned Labour there. I listened to Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, today, and I find it quite an eerie experience in some respects. She was talking about growth being the absolute primary focus of the government, about the need for house building, about the need for unblocking, about the need for building onshore wind farms and all the rest. And I thought, I've heard this stuff before. This sounds a bit Liz Truss. This sounds a bit Simon Clarke.
Well, I have to say I had a slight out-of-body experience today, because whilst clearly there are massive differences between how the Chancellor approaches these questions and how I would, I also think that some of what she said in her speech today was right and important. And I've been a strong advocate for growth. I think that fundamental insight of what Liz talked about was absolutely right, even if the execution was wrong. And I think when it comes to these questions, there are now really important issues for the Conservative Party to face up to here. House prices are now at their most expensive relative to earnings since 1876. They're about 9 times average earnings now. In the 1990s, that was about 4 times. So there has been a massive problem with our house building industry, a lack of, frankly, the ability to produce sufficient land supply. If we resist what the government is setting out here, I worry it's going to put us in a very bad place with the voters, because actually we do need to sort this.
Are you saying that part of what Rachel Reeves said today is a speech you could have given?
It is, and I'm sure she wouldn't be particularly happy to hear me say that, and it doesn't sit particularly comfortably with me. But look, I do think that as we move forward through this Parliament, we're going to have to recognise that whilst we got lots of things right as a government over the last 14 years, and I would defend education and welfare reform and honouring Brexit to the last ditch, I do think we got house building badly wrong. And I look at some of the by-election campaigns that we fought in Mid-Bedfordshire or Selby over the last year, which were almost explicitly on a NIMBY ticket. And in a country where, if you look at the breakdown of who voted for who, younger voters and indeed middle-aged voters completely deserted the Conservative Party. Not to have an answer to soaring house prices and rents must be a factor in why we've done so badly, and actually done badly in areas which have traditionally been very strong for us in the South.
Let's turn to the future, because you mentioned Nigel Farage and reform, and you've mentioned Brexit. In terms of where the Tory party goes next, is it not the case that you first of all have to decide whether you want to oppose and fight Nigel Farage or embrace Nigel Farage?
Well, I think we have to address the issues that Nigel Farage is talking about, and it's not really for me to determine now who should or shouldn't be in the Conservative Party, but I do think that immigration was an enormous issue on the doorsteps in my constituency, and the widespread perception that even if I was tough enough on the subject, my party wasn't, was really an hour by hour, not just a day by day experience. So I think we have to address it. I think we do need clearer answers, in particular on actually legal migration as much as on illegal migration, because clearly the one, although it's much smaller, distorts the other. And I think that we are going to have to tackle this. I've read some colleagues saying that the country's moved to the left and we should follow them. I completely disagree with that. The party actually needs to reflect the mood of the country, which on immigration is certainly on the centre-right.
And could you see Nigel Farage coming back into the Conservative family?
I could. I mean, I think that is a complex question because he has also attacked that Conservative family, and it doesn't sit particularly well with me that someone who's talked about destroying us should be part of that. But equally, do we need in some way to reunify the centre-right? Yes. If you look at what happened in this election, it's effectively the inverse of 1983, where Labour and the SDP split the centre-left and allowed Mrs Thatcher an enormous majority. We now find ourselves on the other side of that, and there is no way forward for the Conservative Party that doesn't satisfactorily address the legitimate concerns of millions of centre-right voters that we simply weren't credible on public service reform, on the economy, on tax, and on immigration. And that needs to be laid alongside the existing challenges that I've already mentioned around house building, and I think the environment, because I think one of the least sensible things that Rishi Sunak did as leader was to put us into a position where we were making out that the green transition is a bad thing for Britain and a bad thing for the economy. On Teesside, we're demonstrating week in and week out that is not the case, and actually all the jobs in my part of the world are in those green technologies, and onshore wind can certainly and will now happily be one of them.
I suspect you know what I'm going to ask you next. You don't have a vote in the leadership campaign as an MP anymore, but you have a vote possibly as a local member when that moment comes. Is there a candidate at the moment that you think, yes, that looks like the person for me?
Well, we haven't got the full slate of candidates, and I think it's very important that we don't rush this election, but we do need someone who I think has thoughtful answers to these questions, and someone who can set out a very coherent philosophical explanation of what it is to be a Conservative, why conservatism has better answers to some of the country's challenges than socialism, and this is the most left-wing government probably since the 70s. In terms of how that progresses, naturally, people like Kemi Badenoch, Rob Jenrick are more, to my taste, than some of the other candidates in the field. But I don't prejudge that question. I think critically, we need to let the country hear the arguments, and the parliamentary party obviously have a vital screening role in that process. For me, though, it does need to be someone who can really unpack at a deeper level than a short contest will allow what went wrong.
So a lot of thought, a lot of conversation to be had. You say a longer campaign. Do you think Rishi should stay there as the leader while that unfolds? And how long do you think they should take to resolve?
Well, I think, again, that's not a question which I have a direct say in, but I would like to see Rishi Sunak stay as leader for the duration of that period. It seems to be the cleanest solution that he should. If he's not willing to or able to, which would be understandable.
What is that period?
I think it should run probably until after conference. I think we should be looking here at a contest culminating in November or December, so as to allow meaningful discussion, and not just in Westminster but in the wider country, about what it is that we're going to do and who's going to lead us in that mission. So if Rishi isn't able to do that, and as I say, that would be completely understandable under the circumstances, someone else, I think, could be asked to deputise to hold the fort. The reality is 5 years in opposition is a very long time, and there is no rush, I think. It's much more important we get the answer right.
It is a very long time. You did pretty well in terms of vote share in your constituency. You still lost to Labour. Do you want to come back into politics? Are you going to try and get back in again?
I suspect so. I mean, you can never see round corners, and I'm not going to say definitively today what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years' time, but I love Westminster, and more importantly, I love what Westminster represents, the battle of ideas. I believe, obviously, very deeply in the things that I've talked about for the last 7 years, and I hope to return. I think the truth is it is going to require all people of goodwill on the centre-right to try and rescue the Tory party, because this is a very, very difficult time, and I don't think anyone should be under any illusions as to the scale of the challenge we face.
Simon Clarke, peering into a misty future. You've been very candid. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Andrew.